a small working group, East-West Institute, could be very helpful on by bringing in a good cross-section of, because they're all here. You've got lawyers, you've got everybody else that can look at this thing, and at least have a framework by which people can start making incremental progress over the next couple of years. May not be a perfect solution, but it'll be progress. The next element is cyber attack transparency and information sharing. There was some discussion earlier, so I won't, that kind of covered what we covered, so I won't repeat it. But basically, what's really needed on multiple levels, and I forgot which of the panelists brought this up, is from a worldwide standpoint, public-private, it's the intellectual, economic impacts. How do you do this at multiple levels in terms of real-time intelligence? And this is not something that can really be done, in our view, government to government. You almost need, and one of the recommendations is to establish almost like an international third-party non-governmental organization that'll foster cooperation between states and between public and private sectors. The last element in this thread is the economics of national security. And this is one that was put forth by the members of our group because we felt that it was very important in order to complete the trail. So here's the rationale. The private sector is motivated by economic benefit, and so if you take a look at it, what can you do? Well, you want to really reduce the cost of cybersecurity, and you want to increase the cost of the penalty if in fact there is an attack. So we have a couple of recommendations regarding the development and implementation of market incentives in order to promote the use and implementation of proven standards, techniques, and tools, and the like. Let me just give you one example of what the folks talked about in the group. So you can't just think of cyber as an operational or a technical type issue. And so our bottom line is you have to think about it as an economic strategic issue that ultimately can be looked at as an instrument of national policy. So, for example, how is foreign aid dispensed? And we're talking internationally. What's the linkages to that? What happens, in fact, if you follow that thread and you find somebody that, in fact, has violated a framework, generally accepted principles, et cetera? How do you wrap that up with a penalty? And so we think that there's some things that can be done in order to take advantage of it. So, to summarize, rules of the road. How do you basically define a cyber conflict? What is a legal framework or structure, at least even initially with basic principles? Real-time information sharing, and wrap it all up with an economic structure that incentivizes and penalizes, incentivizes the good, penalizes the bad, and consider using that as an instrument of national policy. Thank you.
John.
So in the concept of the domains, one of the things I took away was airspace and sea to a great degree. Part of the reason that the rules were easier to develop was because the cost to entry and participating was pretty high. So essentially a small group of nations began participating, and then as a result of participating and colliding in that space, then began to establish the rules. Cyber essentially in the span of a single decade took all nations almost to the participating in the common domain. So you didn't start with two groups making the rules of the road, you essentially started with 180. So the preponderance of the learnings of how we got to the rules that we have now for all nations, I think is the one that you would mention leveraging, and I completely agree with that statement, and I liked and took it away. There are two things that'll probably still stick in my mind. The first was you were talking about the consequences going up with reduction of cost overall. And I think that's exactly the key lever that's got to get moved as a result of what we feel today. And the second, and I don't know how I'm ever going to get out of this out of my mind, is, quote, how do you present and prosecute with evidence of cyber blood? So that one's going to be sticking in my head for a long time.
Evidence of cyber blood, ones and zeros. Okay, Kamlesh.
It's a very wide area. In fact, almost like 5 working groups in this particular breakthrough group. But I would like to comment on essentially the information sharing aspect that you highlighted, sharing information in real time. So that is something which would be a great example for international cooperation. But then, will the states or countries be actually willing to do so? What we also have to do as part of the economics of national security is to make it more expensive for criminals, which means that the offensive capabilities of nations to really create defense is something which would be required, as one of the presidential directives of the US also says, and that I think has been implemented. So this is one area that we have to see carefully, that how it can really be achieved. But then the international cooperation on the legal framework, again, harmonization is a major concern. And I have personally participated in this particular subgroup and seen the great difficulties that are there. How do we start? Do we start with the ITU kind of standard model templates that are created? Or we begin with some of the other laws which other countries have created? So these are rules which will have to be transported from one country to the other, especially the developing world, to make them aware of what the cyber laws are and how they need to create nodal centers within their organizations, within their countries for public-private partnership, and then create, I would say, try cyber crimes. So internally as well as for giving confidence for the international cooperation.
Thank you. I had the advantage of being in this group as well, so it's, I really am struck by how do we increase the costs to the perpetrator, whoever that might be, whether it's actual cost, increase their expertise, or make it harder for them to break into the systems. Prosecution is needed, and then and that leads to sort of the attribution. There was a quote in the overall work stream that I thought was, it struck me, it was my aha moment. And it's one's public response will be proportional to the degree of attribution you are prepared to endorse in the court of public opinion. And so it was a humph moment, a Hathaway humph. All right, I'm going to move on to General Harry Radke for our last national security panel.
Well, last but certainly least, I'd like to give a report on the National Security Agency Team A. And our breakthrough group was co-led, and I want to recognize Minister Ryan Lang, the Minister of Justice from Estonia, because he not only co-led this panel, but he also participated on the first day of our conference on a very meaningful panel discussion. I guess we came up with a roadmap for action in these 5 areas that were given to National Security Team A and B, and I appreciate Paul Snyder's comments. And what I'm going to try and do is eliminate the duplication that we had, but maybe give some new ideas on the areas that we were involved with. And I'm going to actually reverse the order of how I had it on my paper to follow the order that Paul presented. So I'm going to cover rules of engagement first and our discussions in that area. We thought that we need to agree on a set of principles, even though we start in a very broad context to begin with, because global implications really need to be taken into account. And there's many sides to every story in this regard. In fact, when I think about the rules of the road, some people drive on the left side of the street and some people on the right. So that can cause some healthy collisions if you don't get those basic principles of rules of the road or rules of engagement clearly in your mind of some basic set of principles to work from. The second area that Paul brought up was the cyber conflict policy area. And we think that there's quite a bit of ambiguity of what should rise to the level of a cyber-recognized conflict. In fact, we think that there should be a cyber